"Here it is, Señor Almeida," said the elderly jeweler, placing a delicate gold bracelet on the velvet cushion. "Handcrafted, only one in the world, just like you requested." Daniel didn't answer right away. He studied the piece. The way the links coiled like memories, smooth and unbroken, catching the light with restrained elegance. It wasn't for anyone else. It was for him. A gift to mark 5 years since he'd walked away from debt, doubt, and the cramped apartment where he used to count coins for coffee. 5 years since he'd traded sleep for spreadsheets, love for ambition, and nights of quiet laughter for boardrooms echoing with hollow applause. "I'll take it," he said at last, his voice low, almost reverent. He handed over his card without looking at the total. Numbers no longer mattered the way they once had, not when they came so easily. As the jeweler wrapped the bracelet in silk paper, Daniel stared past the shop window. Outside, the city pulsed with ordinary lives. People rushing home, sharing umbrellas, laughing in doorways. He used to be one of them. "You've built something remarkable, Señor Almeida," the jeweler murmured, handing him the small box. "Yet, you don't look like a man celebrating." Daniel's throat tightened. He forced a thin smile. "Maybe celebration isn't what I thought it would feel like." He stepped out onto the street, the box snug in his palm, the cool air wrapping around him like a question. Raindrops dotted his shoulders. He took a slow breath, trying to feel something. Pride, relief, joy, anything to match the weight of his success. And then he saw her. Across the street, beneath the awning of a small bakery, stood Laura. His Laura. Or the woman who had been his Laura. She was leaning slightly to one side, one hand resting on the curve of her belly, the other holding 2 grocery bags. Her hair, once always tied back in a neat bun, now fell in soft waves around her shoulders, damp from the mist. Her coat was worn at the cuffs, her shoes, practical, scuffed. But her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, were the same. Time stopped. The city noise faded. The honking taxis, the chatter of passers-by, even the rain seemed to hold its breath. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs like a prisoner desperate to be heard. She's pregnant. The thought hit him like a wave, cold and undeniable. Not just pregnant, carrying a life. And something inside him knew with terrifying certainty that this child was his. He hadn't seen her in over a year. Not since the day she'd stood in their old kitchen, suitcase by the door, and said, "You're not absent, Daniel. You're just gone. Even when you're here." He told himself she'd move on, that she'd find someone steadier, kinder, someone who didn't measure love in quarterly profits. He told himself he was doing her a favor by disappearing. Now, standing there with a bracelet meant to celebrate his loneliness, he realized he hadn't been building a life. He'd been building a tomb. He crossed the street slowly, each step heavier than the last. She saw him coming. Her breath hitched just once, but she didn't look away. "Laura," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. She nodded, not smiling. "Daniel." A silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. You're expecting," he managed, eyes drifting to her stomach. "Yes," she said simply. Then, after a heartbeat, 7 months. The rain fell harder now, but neither moved. He wanted to ask why she never told him, why she disappeared. But the real question clawed at his chest. "Would you have told me if you thought I'd stayed?" Instead, all he could say was, "I didn't know. I tried." She whispered, "I called. I wrote. You changed your number. Your address. You vanished." He had no defense. And in that moment, standing in the rain with the weight of a future he hadn't known existed pressing against his chest, Daniel realized the bracelet in his hand was meaningless. Because the only thing worth celebrating wasn't behind him. It was right here, breathing in front of him, wrapped in the quiet courage of a woman who had carried more than a child. She'd carried hope, and maybe, just maybe, a second chance. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada tópico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio tópico tu com dialogo como su faço espectador. sempre lembrando de desenvolver com vida moco. Com os sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters com 3, max 11:47 a.m. inside the hushed elegance of Bijou. Eternal. The air smelled faintly of aged wood and lemon oil, a scent that carried the weight of old money and quiet decisions. Daniel stood still, the bracelet now tucked into the inside pocket of his coat, its small box a silent companion against his ribs. The jeweler, a man with silver-rimmed glasses and fingers that moved like they'd memorized every gemstone soul, carefully locked the display case. "You've come a long way, Senor Almeida," the man said, not unkindly. "I remember when you first walked in here. No tie, shirt wrinkled, eyes full of dreams and doubt." Daniel gave a small nod. "That was a different life. Or the same life, just unfinished," the jeweler replied, folding a cloth with deliberate care. "Success doesn't erase the past, you know. It only gives you room to face it." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked away, toward the rain-streaked window, where the blur of the city felt safer than his own reflection. He had come a long way. From nights eating stale bread in a studio apartment with a leaky faucet, to boardrooms where deals were struck over single malt whiskey and silence. He'd built an empire on stubborn mornings, sleepless nights, and a belief that if he could just reach enough, he'd finally feel whole. But wholeness, it turned out, wasn't something you could purchase. As he waited for his receipt, his mind drifted, back to the small flat they'd once shared near Alfama, with its creaky floorboards and balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs. Laura used to sit there in the evenings, reading poetry aloud, her voice soft as twilight. He'd pretend to listen, but more often than not, he was already drafting emails in his head, chasing a future that kept moving further away. "You were always in a hurry," she told him once, closing her book with a sigh. "But life doesn't wait for us to catch up." He hadn't understood then. He thought love was something that would wait, patient, eternal, like the city's stone walls. But love, he now realized, needed presence. Not grand gestures, not expensive gifts, just you, here, now. And he hadn't been. He remembered the last fight. Not loud, not dramatic, but devastating in its quiet finality. She'd stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes red but dry. "You're not cruel, Daniel. You're just absent. You left your body here, but your heart? It's somewhere in a spreadsheet, lost between profit margins." He'd tried to argue, said he was doing it for them, for security, for a life where she'd never have to worry. But she just smiled sadly. "I never asked for a mansion, Daniel. I asked for you." And now, standing in the warmth of a jewelry store he could easily buy 10 times over, he felt colder than he ever had in that leaky apartment. The jeweler handed him the receipt. "Will you wear it yourself?" Daniel glanced down at his bare wrist. "I bought it as a marker, a reminder that I made it." "And did you?" the old man asked gently. "Make it?" The question hung in the air like incense, holy, haunting. Before Daniel could answer, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his assistant. "Investors call in 30. They want updates on the Singapore acquisition." He stared at the screen. Another deal. Another milestone. Another empty victory. He thought of Laura, waiting in the rain with her swollen belly and tired eyes. Of the child growing inside her, his child, who would soon enter a world where its father had everything, except time. "No," Daniel said softly, more to himself than to the jeweler. "I don't think I've made it at all." He stepped back out into the street, the city's rhythm wrapping around him once more. But this time it didn't feel like noise. It felt like life, messy, urgent, precious. And somewhere in that life, a woman he'd loved and failed was carrying the one thing his money could never buy, a chance to begin again. The bracelet in his pocket felt heavier now. Not with gold, but with regret. And yet, beneath the regret, something else stirred. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but undeniably alive. Like the first breath of a newborn. like the quiet courage in Laura's eyes when she'd said his name. He didn't head toward his waiting car. Not yet. Instead, he turned his collar up against the rain and walked, slowly, purposefully, back toward the bakery awning. She hadn't moved, hadn't fled. That alone felt like a miracle. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the faint rise and fall of her breath, far enough to give her space, if she still wanted it. "Laura," he said again, quieter this time, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile thread between them. She looked up, raindrops clinging to her lashes like tiny stars. Her eyes searched his, not with anger, not with longing, but with a weary kind of caution, like someone who'd been burned once and wasn't sure if the flame before her was warmth or warning. "You came back," she said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation, laced with something unspoken, surprise, maybe, or hope carefully buried. "I couldn't just walk away," he admitted, voice rough. "Not this time." A silence settled between them, filled only by the patter of rain on canvas and the distant hum of a passing tram. He noticed how her knuckles were white around the grocery handles, how her coat was too thin for the season, how she subtly leaned against the wall, as if her body needed the support. "Are you okay?" he asked, the words clumsy but sincere. She gave a small, tired laugh, just a breath. "Really? Physically? Mostly. Emotionally? That's a longer conversation." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Then let's have it." Her eyes flickered with something, doubt, memory, pain. "Daniel, it's been over a year. You disappeared. Changed numbers, sold the flat, left no forwarding address. And now you show up, holding a jewelry box, like nothing happened." He winced. "I didn't know about the baby." "But you knew about me," she said, voice cracking just slightly. "You knew I loved you. You knew I waited. And still, you chose your empire over us." The truth of it hit him like a stone in the chest. He had, repeatedly, he'd told himself it was temporary, that once he made it, he'd slow down, come back, make it right. But time doesn't pause for ambition, and people don't wait forever. "I was wrong," he said, no excuses, no deflection. "I thought success would fix everything, that if I gave you security, you'd understand why I was gone. But I see now you didn't need a provider. You needed a partner." She looked away, blinking quickly. When she turned back, her voice was softer, but no less firm. "This baby, it's yours. 7 months. I found out 2 weeks after you stopped answering calls." Daniel's breath caught. 7 months. That meant she'd been alone through the nausea, the first ultrasound, the midnight fears, the nursery plans made in silence. The weight of it crushed him. "Why didn't you try harder to find me?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I did," she whispered, "for weeks. Then I realized. If you wanted to be found, you would have let me." The truth of that stung worse than any accusation. He took a half step closer, hands trembling at his sides. "I can't change the past, Laura, but I'm here now, and I want to be part of this. Of you, of our child." She studied him, really studied him, as if searching for the man she'd once loved beneath the tailored coat and rehearsed confidence. "You say that now," she said slowly, "but what happens when the investors call? When the next once-in-a-lifetime deal lands in your inbox? Will you stay or vanish again?" He reached into his coat. Not for his phone, not for his wallet, but for the small box. He opened it slowly, the gold bracelet glinting dully in the gray light. Then, without ceremony, he placed it on the wet ledge beside her. "This was supposed to be my trophy," he said. "But standing here looking at you, I realize the real victory isn't what I've earned. It's what I still have a chance to protect." She stared at the bracelet, then at him, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "I want to walk you home," he said simply. "Carry your bags. Sit with you for 10 minutes. Hear your voice. That's all. No promises. No pressure. Just presence." A long moment passed. The rain softened. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. Then, slowly, Laura shifted her weight and extended one of the grocery bags toward him. "Don't drop the eggs," she said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. He took the bag with trembling hands, careful, reverent, as if holding something far more fragile than groceries. And as they stepped out from under the awning and into the rain together, side by side, not touching but no longer apart, the city seemed to hold its breath, because something had shifted, not fixed, not yet, but possible. And in that quiet, rain-soaked moment, with the weight of the past behind them and the unknown ahead, Daniel finally understood. They bared what their hearts were still learning. The grocery bags rustled softly between them. His grip firm, hers lighter now, as though a fraction of her burden had already been lifted. Daniel stole glances at her, her profile softened by pregnancy, her gaze fixed ahead, unreadable. He wanted to speak, to fill the space with reassurance, but the words felt too heavy, too risky. What if he said the wrong thing? What if silence was safer? But then she stopped, not abruptly, just a gentle pause beneath the flickering light of a street lamp outside a small cafe with fogged windows and the warm scent of cinnamon drifting through the door. "I can't go home like this," she said, her voice low, strained. He turned to her, heart pounding. "What's wrong?" She exhaled slowly, one hand pressing against her lower back. "The rain, the walk. I've been on my feet since morning. My contractions started an hour ago." Daniel froze. "Contractions? But you're only 7 months. They're probably Braxton Hicks," she said, trying to sound calm, but her knuckles whitened around the bag. "But they're closer together than they should be." Panic flared in his chest, sharp and primal. "We need to get you to a hospital." "I don't want to go alone," she whispered, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. Her eyes met his, vulnerable, raw, stripped of the careful composure she'd worn like armor. "I've done everything alone so far, but right now, I can't." The words struck him like a vow, not a plea, a truth. Without another word, he set the bags down on the dry step of the cafe, pulled out his phone, and canceled his next 3 meetings in a single breath. Then he turned to her, voice steady despite the storm inside him. "You're not alone anymore." He helped her inside the cafe, where the warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. The barista, an older woman with kind eyes, took one look at Laura and gestured to the back room. "Sit, Querida. I'll call a taxi to Sao Jose Hospital. They have a good maternity wing." As Laura sank into a worn armchair, Daniel knelt beside her, ignoring the curious glances. He didn't touch her, didn't assume, but stayed close, his presence a quiet anchor. "Tell me what to do," he said. "Just stay," she breathed, closing her eyes as another contraction rippled through her. "Don't leave." "I won't," he promised. And this time it wasn't a hope. It was a vow etched in bone. While they waited, the silence wasn't empty. It was thick with everything unsaid. Memories, regrets, fears, but also something new. A fragile thread of trust, spun in the space between heartbeats. When the taxi arrived, Daniel helped her up, supporting her weight gently, his arm around her back not as a lover, but as a shelter. In the back seat, she leaned her head against the window, exhausted, while he held her hand, not romantically, but like someone holding on to hope. At the hospital, nurses moved quickly but calmly. They wheeled Laura into an examination room, and Daniel stood in the hallway. Rain still damp in his hair, his expensive coat streaked with mud, the bracelet long forgotten in his pocket. A nurse paused. "Are you the father?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "Stay with her," the nurse said gently. "Fear can worsen early labor. Familiar voices help." He stepped inside. Laura lay on the narrow bed, eyes wide with fear now that the adrenaline was fading. When she saw him, her breath hitched. "You came," she said, voice trembling. "I said I would," he replied, pulling a chair close. He didn't reach for her hand this time. She did. Her fingers curled around his, small but strong. "They're monitoring the baby," she whispered. "If the contractions don't stop, they might have to deliver early." Daniel's throat tightened. He looked at her belly. His child, fighting to stay safe inside her. "She's strong," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "Because you are." Tears spilled down her cheeks then, silent and slow. "I was so angry at you," she confessed. "But more than that, I was terrified you'd never care. That this baby would grow up not knowing you, or worse, knowing you only as someone who walked away." "I'm learning," he said softly. "Every second with you now. It's teaching me what really matters." Outside, the city continued its endless hum. But in that sterile room, time narrowed to the sound of her breath, the beep of the monitor, the warmth of her hand in his. And in that moment, Daniel understood. This wasn't just about saving a pregnancy. It was about saving them, not as the couple they once were, but as the parents they could become. The contractions slowed. The doctor said it was a scare, not a crisis. But the damage, no, the awakening was already done. As Laura drifted into an exhausted sleep, Daniel stayed. He didn't check his phone, didn't think about boardrooms or balance sheets. He just watched her breathe. This woman who had carried his future in silence, and made a silent promise to the child growing inside her. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving." "You stayed," she whispered, voice hoarse with sleep and something deeper, something like awe. "I said I would," he replied, offering a small, tired smile. His eyes were bloodshot, his stubble darker, his suit wrinkled. But for the first time in years, he looked real. Not polished, not performing, just present. She shifted slightly, wincing as a dull ache reminded her of the scare the night before. "They said I can go home later today, as long as the contractions don't return." He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll take you." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been coiled in her chest like a spring. "Why, Daniel? Why stay now? What changed?" He looked down at their joined hands, as if the answer lived in the space between their fingers. "I thought success meant building something the world would admire," he said quietly. "But last night, watching you fight to keep our child safe, alone, exhausted, and still so strong, I realized the only thing worth building is this. A life, not a legacy. A life with you, with them." Her eyes filled again, but she blinked the tears back. "It's not that simple. We're not the same people we were." "I know," he said, "and maybe that's good. Maybe the old us wasn't ready. But this version of me, the one who finally sees you, really sees you, wants to try. Not to fix the past, just to walk the rest of the path with you, even if it's just as co-parents." She studied him for a long moment, searching for cracks in his resolve, for the old evasion, the polished deflection. But there was none. Only raw sincerity, quiet and steady. Then, with a slow breath, she said the words that had haunted her, and would now change everything. "His name is Mateus." Daniel froze. "Mateus?" She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "After your grandfather, the one you told me about, the fisherman from Nazar who taught you to tie knots and never lie to the sea." He felt his chest crack open. He hadn't told her that story in years. Hadn't thought she remembered. You kept that?" "I kept everything," she admitted softly. "Even when I was angry, even when I told myself I'd forgotten you." She placed her free hand on her belly. "I wanted him to know where he came from. Even if you weren't there, I wanted him to carry your roots." Daniel's vision blurred. He leaned forward, his forehead nearly touching hers. "I want to be more than roots, Laura. I want to be the shelter too." A silence settled, warm and thick with possibility. Outside, the city woke. Buses rumbled, voices rose and fell. But inside, time seemed suspended in the quiet intimacy of a promise being reborn. Then, softly, she asked, "What happens when you go back to your world? Your meetings, your deals, your life in that glass tower?" He didn't flinch. "My world isn't there anymore. It's here, wherever you and Mateus are." He paused, voice dropping to a whisper. "Let me help you, not with money, with me. Let me be there for ultrasounds, Let me assemble the crib. Let me hold him when he cries at 3 a.m. She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time he saw not suspicion, but tenderness flickering in her gaze. "You'll leave again," she said, not as an accusation, but as a fear she needed to name. "I won't," he said, "because if I do, I lose more than a child. I lose the only chance I've ever had to be truly whole." She exhaled, long and slow, as if releasing a year of loneliness in one breath. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned into his hand. "Okay," she whispered, just one word, but it carried the weight of 1,000 tomorrows. And as the morning light grew stronger, painting the room in gold, Daniel knew this wasn't an ending. While they didn't speak much on the way to her building, a modest walk-up in a quiet neighborhood of ivy-covered walls and laundry lines strung between balconies. The kind of place where life hummed in low tones. Children's laughter from an open window, the scent of coffee and baking bread, the creak of an old gate. When they reached her door on the 3rd floor, Laura fumbled with her keys, her fingers trembling slightly. Daniel stepped forward instinctively. "Let me." She hesitated, then handed him the key. The door opened to a tiny apartment, clean but worn, sunlight pooling on wooden floors. A half-assembled crib sat in the corner, its instructions spread across a low table. Books on newborn care lined a shelf beside a single-framed photo. Daniel recognized it instantly. It was from their last summer together, on a beach near Cascais. They were laughing, salt in their hair, arms around each other like the world couldn't touch them. He looked away, throat tight. "I kept it," she said softly behind him. "Not because I was waiting, but because I needed to remember that we were happy once. That love isn't always a mistake." He turned to her. "It wasn't a mistake. We just got lost." She nodded, then sank carefully onto the sofa, one hand resting on her belly. "I need to rest." The doctor said no stress, no heavy lifting. "I'll finish the crib," he said without hesitation. She looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to." He knelt by the pieces, picking up the instruction sheet. "I've closed €1 billion deals, but I've never built anything that matters, until now." A small, tired smile touched her lips. "It's just wood and screws." "No," he said, glancing at her. "It's the first home our son will know." The silence that followed was different now, softer, layered with unspoken understanding. He worked quietly, hands steady despite the unfamiliar task, while she watched him from the couch, eyes half-closed but alert, as if memorizing this new version of him. Sleeves rolled up, brow furrowed in concentration, completely present. After a while, she spoke again, voice low. "Why did you really buy that bracelet, Daniel?" He paused, screwdriver in hand. "I thought I was celebrating survival, but I was really trying to convince myself I'd won. And now I see I was celebrating the wrong thing." He looked at her. "Winning isn't having everything. It's not losing what matters most." She looked down at her hands, twisting a simple silver ring, the one he'd given her on their first anniversary. "I was so angry," she admitted. "But more than that, I was afraid. Afraid you'd see the baby as an obligation. Or worse, a burden to your perfect life." He set the screwdriver down and moved to sit on the floor near her, careful not to crowd her. "There is no perfect life without you both in it. I don't need a penthouse if my heart's empty. I don't need applause if no one's waiting for me at the end of the day." Her eyes glistened. "You say that now, but promises are easy when the moment is heavy." "Then let me prove it in the lightness," he said gently. "In the ordinary days, in the middle of the night feedings, in grocery runs and pediatrician appointments. Let me show you, not with words, but with showing up." She studied him for a long moment, then whispered, "Stay for lunch. I bought ingredients for soup yesterday, before everything happened." It wasn't a grand invitation, but it was trust. He smiled real warm, the kind that reached his eyes. "I'd like that." As she rose slowly to the kitchen, Daniel returned to the crib, but his mind was already racing ahead. Not with deals or deadlines, but with images. Holding Mateus for the first time, reading him stories, walking him to school, teaching him to tie knots like his great-grandfather. And then, a thought struck him, sharp, urgent. "What if he comes early?" he asked suddenly. Laura turned, ladle in hand. "The hospital has a neonatal unit. It's good. But what if I'm not there?" The fear spilled out before he could cage it. "What if you go into labor and I'm in a meeting? What if I miss it? Like I missed everything else?" She set the ladle down and walked slowly toward him. She didn't touch him, but stood close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Then you'll be late," she said calmly. "But you won't be absent. Not if you keep choosing to stay." He swallowed hard. "I choose to stay." She held his gaze. "Prove it." And in that moment, Daniel knew this wasn't just about building a crib. It was about rebuilding a life. One honest day at a time. Outside, the city buzzed on, indifferent, or grand declarations, but with groceries, prenatal vitamins, and the same careful silence that said more than words ever could. He'd stay for an hour, sometimes two, helping hang curtains, fixing the wobbly kitchen table, sitting with Laura as she read aloud from a dog-eared book of Portuguese lullabies. But on the fourth evening, as golden light spilled through her window and the scent of chamomile tea filled the small living room, Laura set her cup down and looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part sorrow, part relief, as if she were about to unearth something long buried. "You asked why I didn't tell you sooner," she said softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "I should have told you the whole truth." Daniel sat forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm listening." She took a slow breath. "When I found out I was pregnant, it was 2 weeks after you changed your number. I'd already tried calling your office. They said you were unreachable on personal matters. I wrote you a letter, mailed it to your last known address. No reply." Her voice wavered slightly. "I even went to your building once. The doorman wouldn't let me pass the lobby. Said you'd given strict instructions. No visitors without prior approval." Daniel's stomach twisted. He remembered that order. It had been during the Singapore acquisition when he'd shut out the entire world. He'd thought he was protecting his focus. Instead, he'd locked out the one person who mattered. "I thought you'd moved on," she continued, eyes downcast. "That maybe you'd met someone else. Built a new life without looking back." She paused, then met his gaze. "But the truth is, I didn't just stop trying because I thought you didn't care. I stopped because I was ashamed." Ashamed. The word startled him. "Why?" She wrapped her arms gently around her belly, as if shielding Mateus from the memory. "Because I was scared I'd be like my mother. She raised me alone after my father walked out. Said he wasn't ready for fatherhood. I swore I'd never put my child through that." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "So when you disappeared, I told myself, better to do it alone than to beg for scraps of your attention." Daniel felt as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. "Laura, I would never have—" "I know that now," she interrupted gently. "But then, I was drowning in fear, and pride, and grief, for the man I thought you were, and the future I thought we'd lost." He reached out, slowly, and covered her hand with his. She didn't pull away. "I'm so sorry," he said, voice thick. "Not just for leaving, for making you feel like you had to carry this alone." She looked at their joined hands, then back at him. "You can't undo it, but you can choose what happens next." He nodded, eyes burning. "Every day, I choose you. I choose him." She studied him a long moment, then sighed. A soft, releasing breath, like a door finally opening. "There's something else," she said. "I kept your old phone number, the one you had before you went corporate." She reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Flipped to a page filled with dates and tiny notes. "I called it dozens of times. Left messages. Said I was pregnant. Said I needed you. I even recorded my voice reading to the baby, hoping you'd hear it and come back." Daniel's chest ached. "I never got those calls." "I know," she said quietly, "because the number was disconnected. But I kept calling anyway, for weeks, like if I believed hard enough, the line would miraculously reconnect. He bowed his head, tears slipping free before he could stop them. "I had no idea." "I know," she repeated. "And that's the hardest part. You didn't choose to abandon us, Daniel. You just forgot we existed while you were chasing something else." The truth of it settled between them, not as blame, but as a shared wound finally named. Outside, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one. Inside, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of sorrow acknowledged, of a bridge slowly being rebuilt plank by plank. Then, softly, Laura said, "Tomorrow's my next ultrasound. They'll check his growth, his heartbeat, everything." She looked at him, eyes searching. "Will you come with me?" His breath caught. "You want me there?" "I want Mateus to know his father was there from the beginning of his story," she said. "Even if we're rewriting the middle." He squeezed her hand. "I'll be there, 10 minutes early. I'll hold your hand through the whole thing." A small, real smile touched her lips, fragile, but undeniable. "Good." And in that moment, as the first stars blinked into view beyond her window, Daniel realized something profound. Love wasn't about never failing. It was about returning humbly, honestly, relentlessly to the ones you'd failed. Not to fix the past, but to finally show up for the future. The ultrasound was tomorrow. But tonight, in this quiet room filled with forgiveness and chamomile steam, a son already had two parents who, for the first time in a long time, were choosing each. She opened the door already dressed, her hand resting on her belly, eyes tired but calm. "You came," she said, as if still testing the reality of it. "Always," he replied, handing her a coffee. Just the way she liked it, black with a splash of oat milk, no sugar. He'd remembered, or maybe he'd never forgotten. At the clinic, the waiting room was hushed, filled with other expectant parents flipping through magazines or sitting in silence, lost in their own private storms of hope and fear. Daniel sat beside Laura, close enough that their shoulders touched, but not so close it felt forced. He watched her fingers trace invisible patterns on her stomach, and for the first time, he let himself imagine, really imagine, the life growing inside her. Not as an abstract concept, not as a consequence, but as a person. Mateus, his son. When the nurse called her name, Laura stood slowly. Daniel rose with her, and without thinking, laced his fingers gently through hers. She didn't pull away. The examination room was cool, the gel cold on her skin as the technician moved the wand. Daniel stood just behind her shoulder, eyes fixed on the screen. A swirling landscape of shadow and light that meant nothing and everything all at once. And then there it was, a steady, rapid whoosh whoosh whoosh, like tiny wings beating in a storm. "The heartbeat is strong," the technician said with a smile. 142 beats per minute. "Perfect." Laura let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Tears welled in her eyes. "Can we see him?" Daniel asked, voice barely above a whisper. The technician adjusted the angle and suddenly there he was. A curled form, arms tucked under a rounded head, legs drawn in, peaceful. A tiny hand flexed on the screen. "Oh," Laura gasped, covering her mouth. He's beautiful." Daniel couldn't speak. His throat closed around a wave of emotion so vast it felt like drowning and breathing at the same time. That was his son. His son. Not a mistake. Not an obligation. A miracle. "Look," Laura whispered, pointing. "He's sucking his thumb." And he was. A perfect, serene gesture of comfort in the quiet dark of her womb. Daniel reached for Laura's free hand, and this time, she turned and gripped his tightly, her knuckles white, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "I was so scared," she admitted, voice trembling. "Scared he wouldn't be okay. Scared I couldn't do this alone." "You don't have to," he said, his own voice thick. "Not anymore." The technician printed 2 grainy black and white images and handed them over. Daniel took one, staring at the tiny face emerging from the blur, already memorizing the curve of the forehead, the shape of the nose. He tucked it carefully into his coat pocket, right next to the forgotten bracelet. Outside, The sky had begun to clear, thin strands of sunlight breaking through the clouds. They walked slowly back toward her apartment, neither speaking, the silence now a companion rather than a barrier. But as they turned the corner onto her street, Laura stopped abruptly. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked. She leaned against the wall, one hand pressing into her side. "It's nothing," she said, but her breath was shallow, her face pale. "Laura, I've been having these sharp pains since last night," she admitted, voice tight. "I thought it was just the baby moving, but it's getting worse." Fear spiked through him. "We need to go back to the hospital." She shook her head. "Not yet. It might be nothing." But her voice lacked conviction. He didn't argue. Instead, he gently guided her to a bench beneath a chestnut tree, knelt in front of her, and placed his hand, lightly, respectfully, on her belly. "Talk to me. Where does it hurt?" She closed her eyes. "Lower back, like pressure. Constant." His mind raced. He remembered the scare days ago. The doctor's warning. Any recurrence needs immediate evaluation. "Please," he said, voice low but firm. "Let me take you. Not as your ex. Not even as the father yet. Just as someone who can't bear to lose you both." She opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked. Saw the raw fear, the love, the desperate need to protect. And in that moment, she let go of the last thread of pride that had kept her isolated. "Okay," she whispered. He helped her up, arm around her back, and hailed a taxi. As they rode in silence, her head resting against the window, his hand never left her shoulder. But inside, a new terror coiled around his heart. What if this time, it's real? What if I'm too late again? The hospital loomed ahead, white and silent. And as they firmly in Daniel's grasp, he didn't speak, didn't need to. His presence was a steady anchor in the storm of her fear, his silence louder than any reassurance. They were admitted quickly. The same triage nurse from the last scare recognized Laura immediately. "Back so soon, Querida?" she asked, her voice gentle but alert. Laura nodded weakly. The pain hasn't stopped. Within minutes, she was lying on an examination bed, the cool paper crinkling beneath her, and 4-line placed in her arm, just in case. Daniel stood by the window, hands shoved deep in his pockets, watching her face. The way her jaw clenched, the flicker of panic in her eyes every time a contraction tightened its grip. The doctor, a calm woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, entered with a tablet in hand. "We're monitoring you closely, Laura. Your cervix is still closed, but your uterus is irritable. If these contractions continue, we may need to consider interventions to delay labor." Daniel stepped forward. "What does that mean for the baby?" "If Mateus is born now at 30 weeks, he'll need intensive care," the doctor said plainly. "His lungs aren't fully developed. He'll likely spend weeks, maybe months, in the NICU." She paused, looking between them. "Your best chance is to keep him inside as long as possible." Laura's breath hitched. "I can't lose him. I can't." "You won't," Daniel said instantly, his voice rough with conviction. He moved to her side, kneeling so their eyes met. "You're the strongest person I know, and he's fighting because you are." But then the doctor added, "We'll likely admit you for observation, possibly bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy." Laura's face fell. "My apartment. I can't afford to stop working. I was supposed to start a new contract next week, tutoring. It's how I've been paying rent." Daniel didn't hesitate. "You won't lose your home. I'll cover everything." She turned to him, eyes wide. "Daniel, no. I don't want your money." "It's not about money," he said softly. "It's about safety. Yours. His." He took her hand. "Let me help in the way that matters. Not with a check. With shelter. With peace of mind." She searched his face, wary. "What are you suggesting?" "I have a quiet house outside Sintra," he said. "Guest room on the ground floor. Garden. No stairs. Private nurse on call if needed. You'd be monitored. Rested. Safe." He swallowed. "And I'd stay in the city. You wouldn't even see me unless you wanted to." She was silent for a long moment, the monitor beeping steadily beside her. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of their son's heart, still fighting. Finally, she whispered, "I can't accept that. Feels like charity." "It's not charity," he said, voice breaking slightly. "It's fatherhood. Late, imperfect, but real." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not just of losing him, but of letting you back in. And then you disappearing again when this is over." "I'm not going anywhere," he said. And this time, the words didn't feel like a promise made in hope, but a truth carved from regret. "Even if you never forgive me fully, even if we never go back to what we were, I will be here for Matthias. And for you." The doctor stepped back discreetly, giving them space. Laura closed her eyes, tears slipping down her temples into her hair. Then, with a slow inhale, she nodded. "Okay, but on one condition. Anything. You don't buy me things. You don't send staff. You don't turn this into a performance." Her voice grew firmer. "If you're really in this, you show up. In person. Not as the millionaire. As the man who stayed after the storm." He met her gaze, raw and unguarded. "I'll bring groceries. I'll sit with you during contractions. I'll read to Matthias every night through your belly if you let me." A faint, trembling smile touched his lips. "And I'll still make terrible coffee." That made her laugh. A small, watery sound, but real. The doctor returned with admission papers. As Laura signed, Daniel stood by the window, watching rain begin to fall again beyond the glass. But this time, it didn't feel like an omen. It felt like cleansing. Later that evening, as Laura settled into the hospital bed for the night, Daniel lingered at the door, coat in hand. "You should go," she said softly. "Get some rest." He hesitated. "Will you be okay?" "I'll be fine," she said. Then, after a pause, "But, will you come tomorrow?" "With pastries," he said. "And that book of lullabies you like." She smiled, small but genuine. "Good." He turned to leave, but stopped at the threshold. "Laura?" "Yes. If I could go back, I'd answer every call. I'd read every letter. I'd choose you over every deal, every meeting, every version of success that didn't include you." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But since I can't go back, I'll spend every day ahead making sure you and Matthias never doubt your worth again." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes, soft, searching, slowly thawing, said everything. And as Daniel walked into the rainy night, the city lights blurring through the downpour, he carried something new inside him. Not the weight of regret, but the quiet, trembling weight of purpose. Bling at the thought of a single glance from the woman upstairs. Because last night, after leaving Laura, he'd gone home. Not to his penthouse, but to his old office, the one he hadn't visited in months. And there, buried under contracts and accolades, he'd found it. A small, forgotten folder labeled personal. Inside, a stack of unopened letters. And at the very bottom, Laura's handwriting. He hadn't opened them then. He couldn't bear to. But now, standing in the rain, he finally understood. His wealth hadn't protected him. It had isolated him. While he was building an empire, he'd let the only thing that truly mattered slip through his fingers like sand. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. Laura was awake, propped up on pillows, one hand resting on her belly, staring out the window. She turned when he entered, and the relief in her eyes, fleeting but real, cut through him like grace. "You came," she said. "Always," he replied, setting the coffee and pastry on her tray. "Even when I don't deserve to." She didn't argue, just unwrapped a pastel de nata, the scent of cinnamon and custard filling the small space between them. For a while, they sat in silence, the only sound the soft beep of the monitors and the rain outside. Then, quietly, she said, "Last night, I dreamed Matthias was born. He had your eyes. But when I tried to hold him, he turned to mist in my arms." Daniel's chest tightened. "He's not going anywhere, Laura. Neither am I." She looked at him then, not with suspicion, but with a quiet ache. "I keep waiting for the catch. for you to get bored, to realize this life, my life, is too small for you. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low and steady. My life was too big and empty, all that space, and no one to share it with. He met her gaze. You're not small, Laura. You're the only real thing I've ever known. She looked down, fingers tracing the rim of her cup. I used to watch you sleep, she admitted softly. You'd frown even in dreams, like you were always chasing something just out of reach. I was, he said, and I finally caught it. He placed a hand gently on the bed, not touching her, but close. It wasn't success. It was you. It was this. She swallowed hard. What if we fail again? What if we don't? He countered. What if this time we choose each other, not perfectly but consistently? Not in grand gestures, but in showing up when it's hard. A nurse entered to check vitals, interrupting the fragile intimacy. As she adjusted the monitor, Laura winced sharply, her breath catching. Another contraction? The nurse asked. Laura nodded, eyes closed, knuckles white on the sheets. Daniel stood immediately. How long? Has this been happening? Since 4 a.m., she whispered once the nurse left. They're closer now. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in his gut. We can't risk it. You need rest. Real rest. She opened her eyes, exhausted. I can't stay here forever. No, he said, but you can come to Sintra today. My car is downstairs. The house is ready. Nurse on standby. Quiet. Safe. She hesitated. Daniel, I don't want to be your project. Your redemption arc. I don't want you to be, he said fiercely. I want you to be you. Tired, scared, strong. All of it. And I want to walk beside you, not ahead, not behind. Beside. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm so tired of being strong alone. Then let me carry some of it, he said, voice breaking. Not because I owe you, because I love you. And him. The word hung in the air, love. Not spoken in passion, but in surrender. In truth, she didn't say it back, but she reached for his hand. And that was enough. By noon, they were on the road, Daniel driving slowly through the winding hills, Laura dozing in the passenger seat, one hand resting on her belly, the other curled loosely around the ultrasound image. The city faded behind them, replaced by misty forests and stone walls draped in ivy. When they arrived at the house, a modest, sun-washed villa tucked among cypress trees, Daniel helped her inside, showing her the ground floor room with large windows, a soft bed, and a small bookshelf already filled with pregnancy guides and children's stories. I didn't know which ones you'd like, he said, so I bought them all. She touched the spine of one, a Portuguese version of Goodnight Moon. You remembered I loved reading aloud. I remember everything, he whispered. That evening, as dusk painted the sky in lavender and gold, they sat on the garden bench, wrapped in silence and shared blankets. Mateus kicked, strong, insistent, and Laura caught Daniel's hand, pressing it to her belly. Feel that? She said, a faint smile playing on her lips. He felt it, the powerful ripple of life beneath his palm. His son, fighting, growing, belonging. And in that moment, as the first stars blinked awake above Sintra, Daniel finally understood. He hadn't lost everything when he walked away. He'd just been given a second chance to find what truly mattered. Not in boardrooms, not in bank statements. He didn't live in the house. He slept in a small guest cottage at the edge of the property, close enough to be near, far enough to respect her space. Every evening, he'd knock softly on her door before dinner, always asking, "May I?" And every evening she'd say, "Yes," with a little more ease than the day before. But it was the nights that tested him. One evening, as thunder rolled over the hills and rain lashed the windows, Laura called out. Not loudly, but with a sharpness that cut through the storm. Daniel was at her door in seconds, heart pounding. "What is it?" he asked, breathless. She was sitting upright, one hand pressed hard against her side, face pale. It's not a contraction," It's deeper, like pressure in my ribs. He knelt beside the bed, forehead nearly touching hers. Breathe with me, in and out. She tried, but her breath hitched. I'm scared, Daniel. What if my body can't hold him long enough? He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Your body has held him through loneliness, through fear, through nights with no one to lean on. Strong. You're strong. But what if it's not enough? She whispered, tears spilling over. Then we'll face it together, he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. Every scan, every decision, every breath. You won't carry this alone again. Not for one more second. She looked into his eyes, really looked, and for the first time he saw not just caution, but trust blooming beneath the fear. Later, after the pain eased and she drifted into restless sleep, Daniel sat in the hallway, back against the wall, listening to every shift in her breathing through the door. He pulled out his phone, not to check emails, but to open a voice memo app he'd downloaded weeks ago. In the dim glow of the screen, he began to speak, low and soft. Mateus, it's your father. I don't know if you can hear me yet, but I need you to stay a little longer. Your mother is the bravest woman I know, and she's doing everything she can to keep you safe. But I need you to be strong for her, too. Kick when she's sad. Move when she's tired. Remind her you're there. And when you finally come, I promise I'll be the first to hold you. Not because I earned it, but because I finally understand what it means to love someone more than yourself. He saved the recording, labeled it for Mateus, day 28, and tucked the phone away. The next morning, over chamomile tea, Laura asked quietly, "Do you ever talk to him when I'm not around?" He paused, surprised. "Sometimes. At night. Just things I wish I'd said sooner." She looked down at her cup, then back at him, eyes shimmering. "Last night after you left, I played your voice recording, the one I kept from months ago. You were reading that poem by Sophia de Mello, remember? About the sea and silence." He nodded slowly. "I'd forgotten I sent that." "I didn't," she said. "I played it every night when I thought I couldn't go on. Your voice. It reminded me that love doesn't always leave. Sometimes, it just gets lost." The silence between them was thick with everything unsaid. The years, the pain, the slow return of something tender and true. Then, softly, she placed a hand on her belly. "He moved when I played it, like he recognized. You." Daniel's breath caught. Maybe he did. From that day on, their ritual changed. In the evenings, they'd sit together on the garden bench, if the weather allowed, and take turns reading to Mateus. Laura with poetry, Daniel with stories of stars, ships, and old fishermen who taught their grandsons to tie knots that never came undone. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the space between them began to close, not with grand declarations, but with shared silence, with the weight of a hand on a belly, with the quiet certainty that they were no longer two people orbiting the same loss, but two souls learning to build a future, one fragile day at a time. Yet, beneath the calm, a question lingered in the air like the scent of rain before a storm. Would it be enough to keep Mateus safe until his time came? And when that moment arrived, would Daniel finally be ready to hold not just a baby, but the weight of all he'd almost lost? The answer wasn't in words. It was in the way he stayed. Night after stormy night, Daniel had just returned from the market with peaches and fresh goat cheese. The kind, Laura said, reminded her of her grandmother's village. He found her standing in the hallway, one hand braced against the wall, the other pressed low on her belly. Her face was ashen. "Laura," he dropped the bags. "What's wrong?" She turned to him, eyes wide with panic. "My water just broke." His blood turned to ice. "But you're only 33 weeks. I know." She gasped as a contraction seized her, doubling her over. "It's too soon." He was at her side in an instant, arm around her back, voice low and steady despite the storm inside him. "Okay, breathe. I've got you. We're going to the hospital now." He helped her into the car, heart hammering against his ribs as he sped down the winding roads toward Lisbon. One hand on the wheel, the other gripping hers. "Stay with me, Laura. Just stay with me. She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. I'm scared, Daniel. He's not ready. He's stronger than we think, he said, though his voice cracked. And so are you. At the hospital, chaos erupted in controlled urgency. Nurses rushed them through corridors. Monitors were attached. Doctors spoke in calm but rapid tones. Laura was wheeled into a delivery triage room, her gown already damp, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Daniel stayed beside her, holding her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. Even when the doctor said, "We're preparing for a possible emergency C-section," he just nodded and squeezed her hand tighter. "I'm not leaving," he said, voice raw. "Not this time." She looked at him, eyes filled with fear and something else. "Trust. Promise me you'll hold him first, even if I can't." "You will," he said fiercely. "You both will." But as the contractions intensified and the medical team moved with growing urgency, a nurse gently pulled Daniel aside. "You'll need to wait in the hall during delivery. For safety." He shook his head. "No. She needs me. She's stable, Senor Almeida. And the NICU team is on standby. Your presence won't change the medical reality, but your calm will help her through it." The nurse's voice softened. "Go sit with her for 5 more minutes. Then let us do our job." He returned to Laura's side, knelt by the bed, and pressed his forehead to hers. "I'm right outside the door. The second they let me in, I'll be there. And I'll stay until you're both in my arms." She gripped his hand like a lifeline. "Tell him I love him, even if he's too small to understand." "He already does," Daniel whispered. "Because he came from you." Then the nurses guided him out. He stood in the corridor, back against the wall, fists clenched, tears falling freely now. Not from fear alone, but from the unbearable weight of love finally showing up at the moment it mattered most. Minutes stretched like hours. He heard muffled voices, the beep of machines rising in tempo. Then suddenly, a sound that shattered him. A thin, fragile cry. Mateus, his son's first breath in the world. Daniel pushed off the wall, heart in his throat, but a nurse blocked him gently. "Give them a moment. He's stable. Small, but fighting." Minutes later, the doctor emerged, mask pulled down, eyes tired but kind. "Mother and baby are both okay. He's 3 pounds, 11 ounces. He'll go straight to NICU, but his APGAR score is good. Strong lungs." Daniel's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Can I see her?" "Just for a moment." He stepped inside. Laura lay pale but awake, eyes searching the door the second he entered. "Is he?" "He's perfect," Daniel said, voice breaking. "He cried, loud and fierce, just like you." She smiled weakly, tears slipping down her temples. "Go to him." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, soft, reverent. "I'll come back, I promise." Then he followed the nurse down the hall to the NICU, where through a glass wall he saw him. Tiny, wrapped in a pale blue blanket, tubes taped gently to his chest, but breathing, alive, so impossibly alive. A nurse placed a hand on his shoulder. "Would you like to hold him?" He nodded, trembling. They guided him to a small chair, helped him wash his hands in antiseptic, showed him how to cradle the fragile body without disturbing the lines. And then Mateus was in his arms. So small, so warm, so his. Daniel's breath caught in a sob. "Hi, Filio," he whispered, tears falling onto the blanket. "I'm your father, and I'm never letting go again." Outside, the world kept turning. But in that quiet room, filled only with the beep of monitors and the whisper of a newborn's breath, a father finally came home. Not hum of the incubator, the gentle whoosh of oxygen, the alert chime that sent his heart into his throat until a nurse reassured him it was just a routine check. Laura recovered slowly. The first time she walked, unsteady, leaning on a nurse. To see Mateus through the glass, Daniel stood behind her, hands hovering, ready to catch her if she fell. When she pressed her palm against the incubator, whispering his name, Daniel saw something shift in her. A wall crumbling, Not all at once, but enough to let the light in. One evening, as golden hour painted the NICU in soft amber, Laura sat in the rocking chair the nurses had brought in, cradling Mateus against her chest in what they called kangaroo care. His tiny body, still tethered to monitors by thin wires, rose and fell with her breath. Daniel sat on the floor beside them, back against the wall, watching in silent awe. "He knows my voice," she murmured, eyes closed, smiling faintly. "When I sing that lullaby, the one from the book, he calms right away." Daniel reached out and gently brushed a finger over Mateus's curled hand. The baby's fingers flexed, gripping his father's fingertip with surprising strength. "He knows mine too," Daniel said, voice thick. "Yesterday, when I read to him, his heart rate slowed. The nurse said it's a sign of recognition." Laura opened her eyes and looked at him, not with the guarded caution of weeks ago, but with a quiet wonder. "You really stayed. I told you I would. But you didn't just stay," she said softly. "You showed up, fully, even when it was messy, even when it hurt." He lowered his gaze. "I owed you that, and him." "No," she said, shifting slightly to face him. "You didn't owe us anything. You chose us. That's different." A silence settled, filled only by Mateus's soft breaths and the distant hum of the hospital. Then, hesitantly, she said, "Do you ever think about how it all fell apart? Before?" He nodded. "Every day." "Was it really just ambition?" she asked. "Or was it something deeper?" He took a slow breath, remembering the nights he'd lie awake in his penthouse, staring at the ceiling, feeling emptier with every success. "I thought if I could just build something big enough, loud enough, people would finally see me as enough. My father never believed I'd amount to anything, so I chased proof. And in chasing it, I lost sight of what actually made me whole." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "You were my anchor, and I let go because I was afraid you'd see me as weak if I ever stopped running." Laura's expression softened with understanding. "I never wanted you to be strong for the world, Daniel. I just wanted you to be real with me." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their past finally named, finally held. Then Mateus stirred, letting out a tiny whimper. Laura adjusted him gently, humming the lullaby again. "Dorm, meu amor, sabe luz de lua." And almost instantly, he stilled. Daniel watched them, his son, his Laura, and felt something inside him finally click into place, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. Later that night, after Laura returned to her room and Daniel sat alone beside the incubator, he pulled out his phone. Not to call his assistant, not to check stock prices, but to open an email draft he'd started weeks ago and never sent. Subject: "I'm stepping back. Dear board, effective immediately, I will be transitioning out of my executive role. Not because I no longer care about the company, but because I finally care about something more. My son was born 3 weeks early. He's in the NICU, and for the first time in my life I understand what legacy really means. It's not buildings or balance sheets. It's showing up for the people who call you father, partner, home. I'll remain a silent shareholder, but day-to-day leadership must pass to someone who can give it their all. Because I have a different all to give now." Daniel, he hit send before he could second-guess it. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, a nurse approached. "He's doing well," she said gently. "The doctors think he might be ready to go home in 2 weeks, if he keeps gaining weight and breathing steadily." Daniel's breath caught. "Home," she smiled. "Yes, a real home. With both of you." He looked through the glass at Mateus, so small, so fierce, and whispered, "You hear that, Filio? We're going home." And for the first time in years, the word didn't mean a place with marble floors and city views. It meant a room filled with lullabies, shared silence, and the quiet, daily choosing of each other, over and over again. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be sleepless nights, feeding schedules, doctor visits, fears that whispered in the dark. But as Daniel sat in the dim glow of the NICU, watching his son breathe, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. this fragile, imperfect, beautiful beginning was worth every sacrifice. Because love wasn't found in grand exits. He was hanging the damp clothes on a small drying rack when his phone buzzed. The caller ID read Ricardo Mendez, CEO office. He hesitated, then answered. Daniel. Ricardo's voice cut through, cold and clipped. Did you really just resign over text? It was an email, Daniel said quietly, wringing out a sleeve. And no, I didn't resign. I stepped back. There's a difference. Semantics, Ricardo snapped. You walked away from a $2.3 billion acquisition, the deal of the decade, because your baby was born early? Do you have any idea what this does to investor confidence? Daniel looked through the window into the NICU. Mateus was asleep, one tiny hand pressed against the clear wall of his incubator, as if reaching for something beyond the glass. I have a very clear idea, Daniel said, voice steady. I'm choosing what matters. You're throwing away everything you built. No, Daniel said softly. I'm finally building what was missing. Ricardo's silence was sharp, then lower, almost pleading. The board is in chaos. Your partners think you've lost your mind. That woman. She got to you, didn't she? Daniel's grip tightened on the phone. Laura isn't that woman. She's the mother of my son. And if you ever speak about her like that again, consider our 20-year friendship over. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel, come back, Ricardo said, voice cracking slightly. Just for the closing. 1 week. Then you can disappear into daddy mode. No one will blame you. Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered nights in that same boardroom, fueled by ambition and black coffee, convincing himself that sacrifice was noble, that love could wait. But Mateus couldn't wait. Laura couldn't wait. And neither could the man he was finally becoming. I can't, he said, because if I leave now, even for a week, they'll learn to breathe without me. And I won't let them. He ended the call before Ricardo could reply. Later that evening, as he sat beside Laura in the dim NICU, she noticed the tension in his shoulders. Bad news? She asked, her voice soft. He didn't answer right away, just watched Mateus, whose chest rose and fell with quiet determination. My old life is fighting to pull me back, he admitted. They don't understand why I'd walk away from everything. She turned to him, eyes searching. Do you understand? He met her gaze. Yes, because everything I thought I was building was just a house of glass. Beautiful from the outside, hollow inside. He reached for her hand. But this you, him, this messy, fragile love, it's real. It's solid. It's worth staying for. She squeezed his hand, her thumb brushing his knuckles. They'll call you weak, she whispered. The world admires ambition. It fears tenderness. Let them, he said. I'd rather be called weak by strangers than fail the people who call me father and love. Just then, Mateus stirred, letting out a soft cry. The nurse checked the monitors, then smiled. He's hungry. Would you like to try a bottle? Daniel's heart leapt. Me? You've been here every day, the nurse said gently. He knows your voice, your scent. Try. Hands trembling, Daniel took the small bottle the nurse prepared, warmed to body temperature. He settled into the rocking chair, cradling Mateus with the care of someone holding the last ember of a dying fire. The baby latched onto the nipple, eyes fluttering open, dark, deep, unmistakably his. Laura watched from the chair beside him, tears glistening in her eyes. He's looking at you, she whispered. Daniel couldn't speak. He just held his son, feeling the tiny suction, the warmth, the miraculous weight of this life he'd almost missed. And in that quiet moment, with his son at his chest and Laura's hand in his, Daniel understood. The world might call him a fool for walking away from power, but heaven knew the truth. He hadn't walked away. He'd finally come home. Outside, the city pulsed with deals and deadlines, with men chasing ghosts of success. He's ready, the nurse said, handing Daniel a tiny car seat wrapped in a knitted blanket Laura had made during her bed rest. Take him home. Home. The word echoed in Daniel's chest like a bell. Not the penthouse with its echoing rooms and view of a city that never slept. Not the office where deals were signed like vows to ambition. But the little house in Sintra, now filled with baby clothes folded with care, a crib assembled with trembling hands, and the quiet rhythm of two hearts learning to beat in sync again. Laura waited by the hospital entrance, leaning on a cane, her body still healing, but her eyes brighter than he'd seen them in months. When she saw Daniel approaching with the car seat cradled in his arms like a holy relic, she stopped breathing for a second. "He's really coming home," she whispered, tears already falling. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. He set the seat gently at her feet and opened it. Matthias blinked up at them, swaddled in soft cotton, his dark eyes wide with newborn curiosity. Laura reached down, her fingers brushing his cheek. "Welcome to the world, meu amor." They drove slowly through Lisbon, then up the winding roads to Sintra, every bump in the road making Daniel flinch. But Matthias slept through it all, peaceful, trusting. Back at the house, Daniel carried the car seat inside while Laura unlocked the door. The living room had been rearranged. A changing table by the window, a rocking chair in the corner, shelves lined with books, bottles, and a single-framed ultrasound image. Laura sank onto the sofa with a sigh, still weak but radiant. "It's strange," she said, watching Daniel carefully unbuckle Matthias. "I spent months terrified of this moment, of bringing him home alone. And now you're here." He looked up from fastening the baby's blanket. "I'm not going anywhere." She studied him, really studied him, the way she used to when they were young and the future felt like an open road. "You gave up everything," she said softly. "Your company, your status, your old life." "I didn't give it up," he corrected gently, settling Matthias into her arms. "I traded it for something real." She looked down at their son, then back at Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are we now, Daniel? We're not exes anymore, but we're not together." He sat on the edge of the coffee table, close enough to touch, but giving her space. "We're parents," he said, "and if you'll let me, we're also two people who remember how to care for each other." She didn't answer right away, just rocked Matthias slowly, humming the lullaby under her breath. He quieted instantly, as if her voice were the only compass he needed. Then, quietly, "I don't want to rush into anything. Not for us. Not for him." "I don't either," Daniel said. "But I do want to be part of your days. Not just his. I want to share coffee with you in the morning. I want to hear you laugh again. I want to walk beside you. Not ahead. Not behind." She looked at him, eyes shimmering. "What if we disappoint each other again? What if we surprise ourselves?" He countered softly. "What if this time we choose patience over pride? Presence over performance?" A long silence filled the room, warm, honest, full of everything left unsaid. Then, Matthias let out a soft cry, rooting against Laura's chest. She adjusted her position, but winced, still sore from the C-section. "Let me," Daniel said gently. He took the baby, cradling him with practiced care, and sat in the rocking chair. "You rest." As he began to rock, he started to sing the same lullaby Laura always used, his voice rough but tender. Matthias stilled, eyes fluttering closed. Laura watched them, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "You learned it," she said. "I listen," he said simply. And in that moment, something shifted, not dramatically, but deeply, like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Later that night, after Matthias was fed and swaddled and sleeping in his crib, Daniel stood on the back porch, staring at the stars. He heard the door open behind him. Laura stepped out, wrapped in a shawl, holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "He's asleep," she said, handing him one. "Good," he replied. "He fought hard to be here." "We all did," she said softly. They stood side by side in silence, the scent of jasmine drifting from the garden, the night alive with crickets and distant owls. Then, almost shyly, she slipped her hand into his. Daniel froze for a heartbeat, then laced his fingers through hers, warm and sure. No grand declaration, no promises of forever, Just two weary souls, standing under the same sky, holding on. And for the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something to chase. Daniel reached into the top drawer of the dresser and pulled out the small velvet box he hadn't opened since that rainy day in Lisbon. The bracelet. He'd carried it with him for months. Not as a reminder of his success, but as a ghost of the man he used to be. Hollow, chasing validation, blind to what was right in front of him. He opened the box. The gold gleamed faintly in the moonlight, cold and perfect and utterly meaningless. Then he turned and walked down the hall to Laura's room. Her door was ajar. She'd taken to leaving it open so she could hear Matthias at night. She was sitting up in bed, reading by lamplight, a shawl draped over her shoulders. She looked up when he entered, her eyes soft with sleep and something else. Wonder, perhaps, at the sight of him holding that box. "You kept it," she said quietly. "I couldn't throw it away," he admitted. "Not yet." Felt like erasing the journey. She set her book down. "And now?" He stepped closer, opened the box, and held it out. Not to her, but between them. "It was supposed to mark how far I'd come. But it doesn't. This does." He gestured toward the nursery. "He does. And you." Laura looked at the bracelet, then at Daniel, her expression unreadable. "You could sell it. Donate it. Start fresh. I want to give it to you," he said. "Not as an apology. Not as a grand gesture. But as a symbol of what I'm leaving behind." She shook her head gently. "I don't want your gold, Daniel. I never did." He nodded, understanding. Then, slowly, he closed the box and placed it on her nightstand. "Then let it stay there, as a reminder that we don't need things to prove our worth. Just each other." She looked at him for a long moment, then reached into her own drawer and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, she withdrew a simple silver pendant. A delicate tree, roots spreading wide, branches reaching upward. "I made this while I was on bed rest," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted him to have something that meant something. Not expensive. Just true." Daniel's breath caught. "It's perfect." She held it out. "I was going to wait until his first birthday. But tonight, it feels right." He took it, the metal warm from her hands. "Can I?" She nodded. He walked back to the nursery, and with reverent care, he slipped the chain around Matthias's neck. So gently it barely stirred him. The pendant settled against the baby's chest, just above his heart. When he returned to Laura's doorway, she was watching him, tears glistening in her eyes. "He's ours," she said softly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "All of him." She patted the edge of the bed. "Stay a while." He sat, not too close, but near enough to feel the warmth of her. Outside, the night deepened, the stars burning steady above Sintra. "Do you ever wonder what our life would have been like if we'd never lost each other?" she asked after a while. "Every day," he said. "But I don't regret it anymore." She turned to him, surprised. "Why not?" "Because if we hadn't broken, we wouldn't know how to mend," he said. "And Matthias, he wouldn't be who he is. Born early, yes, but born into a love that fought its way back. That's his story. And ours." She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling slightly. "I was so angry at you for leaving. But now, I'm grateful. Because the man who came back isn't the one who left. He's better." He squeezed her hand, his throat tight. "Only because you gave me a second chance." They sat in silence, listening to the quiet house, the soft creak of wood, the distant sigh of wind through the pines, the even breaths of their son down the hall. And in that stillness, Daniel realized something profound. The bracelet had marked an ending. But this quiet presence, this shared hope, this fragile, blooming trust, was the beginning of something far more valuable. Not a life of wealth, but a life of meaning. Later, as he rose to leave, Laura whispered, "Daniel." "Yes. Thank you for staying." He paused in the doorway, moonlight framing his silhouette. "I'll stay as long as you'll have me." And as he walked back to the guest cottage, the sky beginning to lighten in the east, he knew he wasn't just staying for Matthias. He was staying because, For the first time, he belonged. Not because of what he had. "He's awake," she said, voice soft. "Crying softly. Not hungry. Just looking for you." Daniel wiped his hands on a towel, heart skipping. "He knows it's today, doesn't he?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe he knows it's the day he was supposed to meet the world. The day we were all meant to be together." They walked to the nursery side by side. No words needed. Inside, Matthias lay in his crib, blinking up at the mobile above him. Tiny wooden fish painted in blues and whites, a gift from Daniel's childhood home in Nazar. When he saw them, his face lit with recognition, and he cooed. A sound so pure it made Daniel's breath catch. Laura lifted him gently, cradling him against her chest. "Happy birthday, meu filho," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Daniel reached out, brushing a fingertip over Matthias's cheek. The baby turned his head instantly, searching for his father's voice. "Happy birthday, Matthias," Daniel said, his voice thick. "You've already changed everything." They sat together in the rocking chair. Laura holding Matthias, Daniel sitting on the floor at their feet, his back against the chair, one hand resting lightly on Laura's knee. The morning sun poured through the window, bathing them in light. "He's so calm today," Laura murmured, watching her son's eyes drift closed. "Like he knows he's safe." "He is," Daniel said, "because we're here. Both of us." She looked down at him, her expression softening. "Do you remember the first time you held him? In the NICU? You cried." "I still do," he admitted. "Every time I look at him." A silence settled, warm and full. Then Matthias stirred, opening his eyes again, wide, dark, alive. He reached out a tiny hand, fingers grasping at the air. Without thinking, Daniel lifted his own hand, palm open. Matthias's fingers curled around his father's thumb with surprising strength. Laura watched them, tears welling. "He's choosing you too," she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. He leaned his forehead against Laura's knee for a moment, overwhelmed by the sheer weight of grace, of being chosen, after all he'd lost. Later that afternoon, they took Matthias to the small garden behind the house. Daniel had strung fairy lights between the olive trees, and Laura spread a blanket beneath the shade. They sat with their son between them, reading aloud from O Menino de Lua, the book they'd read to him in the womb. Matthias listened, eyes bright, one hand batting at a sunbeam. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grass, Laura leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder. "I used to dream about this," she said quietly. "Not the garden, not the book, just us, together, present." He wrapped an arm around her, careful not to squeeze too tight, but enough to say, "I'm here. We're building it now, one ordinary day at a time." She turned her face toward his. "Do you think we'll make it? Really make it?" He looked at Matthias, who had fallen asleep in the crook of Laura's arm, one hand still clutching the silver tree pendant. Then he looked at her, tired, beautiful, brave. "Yes," he said, "not because we're perfect, but because we keep choosing each other, even when it's hard, even when we're afraid." She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of earth and baby and jasmine. "I choose you too, Daniel." And in that moment, as twilight painted the sky in rose and amber, the three of them formed a circle, fragile, imperfect, but unbroken. No grand vows, no rings, just presence, just love. And somewhere in the quiet hush of that garden, beneath the watchful stars, a family was not just born but reborn. Not in a hospital room, not in a boardroom, but here, in the ordinary miracle of showing up, day after day, heart open, hands ready. One rainy afternoon, as Matthias lay on a playmat batting at dangling stars, Laura stood at the window, watching the storm roll over the hills of Sintra. Daniel came up behind her, holding 2 cups of chamomile, and offered one without a word. She took it, fingers brushing his, just for a second, but it was enough. "He smiled today," she said softly, eyes still on the rain. Not just a reflex, a real smile, like he recognized something joyful. Daniel watched their son, now rolling onto his side with determined effort. He's getting strong. He gets that from you, she said, and the words carried no irony, only truth. He looked at her then, really looked. She'd gained back some weight, her cheeks fuller, her eyes less shadowed. But more than that, she carried herself differently. Not with the guarded tension of the woman who'd once braced herself for abandonment, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew she wouldn't be left behind. I've been thinking, he said after a while, voice low, about the future. She turned to him, cautious but open. What about it? I don't want to raise him in pieces, he said. Not in separate apartments, not in scheduled visits, not in your time, my time. I want him to wake up every morning and know, deep in his bones, that his parents chose each other. Not just for him, but for us. She set her cup down, hands trembling slightly. Daniel, we're not the same people we were, but that doesn't mean we're ready to be together again. I'm not asking for marriage, he said gently, or even a label. I'm asking for a home, one home, where we learn to love each other, not as who we were, but as who we're becoming. She looked down at Matthias, who had just grasped a soft rattle and was shaking it with glee. What if we hurt each other again? What if we heal each other instead? He countered softly. We've already survived the worst. Now we get to build something new. She was silent for a long time, the only sound the patter of rain and Matthias's happy babbling. Then, quietly, I'm afraid. So am I, he admitted. But fear shouldn't get to decide our future. Love should. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. You've changed. I had to, he said, because losing you once was enough. Just then, Matthias let out a delighted squeal and rolled fully onto his tummy, pushing up on his arms like a tiny soldier claiming his ground. Laura laughed. A real, bright sound that filled the room like music. Daniel reached for her hand. Let's try, he whispered. Not perfectly, just together. She looked at their joined hands, then back at him, and in her eyes he saw not just acceptance but hope. Okay, she said. We'll try. Not a grand vow, not a dramatic turn. Just two people, weathered by loss, choosing to build something tender in the ruins. Later that evening, as they bathed Matthias together, Laura washing his hair, Daniel wrapping him in a towel with careful hands, their movements fell into sync, like a dance they'd always known but forgotten how to do. He's ours, Daniel said, holding their son close, his skin warm and smelling of soap and milk. Always, Laura replied, resting her head on his shoulder for just a moment. And in that simple gesture, in the shared weight of their child, in the quiet trust of touch, the past didn't vanish. It just made space for something new. They weren't rekindling an old flame. Daniel sat on the porch steps, Matthias balanced on his lap, the little boy chattering in delighted nonsense as he clutched a wooden boat Daniel had carved over weeks of quiet evenings. His fingers, once used to signing million-euro contracts, now knew the grain of olive wood, the curve of a child's smile, the weight of a lullaby sung off-key. Inside, Laura hummed as she washed breakfast dishes, her shadow passing across the sunlit floor every few seconds, a rhythm as steady as the tides. Matthias pointed toward the garden. Agua, he said, grinning. Yes, Daniel laughed, ruffling his son's curls. The stream. We'll go after your nap. The boy wriggled, full of life, full of joy. No trace of the fragile newborn who'd once fought for every breath in a glass box. He was strong, loud, curious, and wholly, perfectly theirs. Daniel reached into his pocket. Not for a phone, not for keys, but for the small velvet box he'd kept all this time. He opened it once more. The bracelet still gleamed, untouched, unnecessary. He stood, lifting Matthias onto his hip, and walked inside. Laura turned from the sink, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes softened when she saw them. Her son clinging to his father's neck, Daniel's expression quiet, resolved. What is it? She asked. He held out the box. I think it's time. She looked at the bracelet, then at him, then at Matthias, who reached for it with curious fingers. "No," she said gently, closing the box and placing it back in his palm. "You keep it." "Why?" "Because it's not about giving it away," she said, stepping closer. "It's about what you've already replaced it with." She touched Matthias's cheek, then Daniel's chest, right over his heart. "You don't need gold to prove your worth anymore. You live it. Every day." He swallowed hard, eyes burning. "I used to think success was something you took. Now I know it's something you give." She leaned into him then, just slightly, her shoulder brushing his. "We got lost," she whispered, "but we found our way back, not to who we were, but to who we were meant to be." Matthias babbled between them, reaching for both their hands at once, as if he understood, instinctively, that his world was held together by these two souls. Later that afternoon, they walked to the old stone bridge over the stream behind the house. The same one Daniel had crossed the day he first brought Laura here, trembling with fear and hope. Now, they walked hand in hand, Matthias toddling between them, his small fingers gripping theirs with fierce determination. At the center of the bridge, Daniel stopped. He didn't kneel, didn't speak of forever. He simply looked at Laura and said, "Thank you for letting me stay." She squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for finally coming home." And in that moment, with the wind